Okay, here we go. That's called
Funky Fees, Funky Reads.
Hey everyone, it's Fiona and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in June. And I accidentally did a blue theme, which I'm pretty happy about. I accidentally did that for the first 3, so then on the 4th one I was like, well, had to continue. And then I also read another blue one after, but I've not quite finished it yet. But that is really boring, so sorry about that. Anyway, the first book I finished this month was The Hike by Lucy Clarke, which was my book I read for my May... Oh my god, I can't talk. This is the book I read for my May TBR Jar prompt, and which was basically like a stiff paperback, which this very much is. It's horrible. But this is a fun one because my grandma got me this for Christmas randomly. I don't think she'd read it or really heard of it. I think she just saw it and was like, I'm going to get that for Fee. Because what I've discovered is we don't have similar reading taste in any way. So it's really nice that she thought to get me a book that was different to what she likes and knows, but she thought I would enjoy it. But anyway, in this book we are following a group of 4 British friends who are going on holiday, a hiking holiday in rural Norway. So basically they alternate who gets to pick where they holiday each year, and it was Liz's turn. Liz? Pretty sure it was Liz's turn, and she unexpectedly picked this hiking trip where in the past they've gone on like beach getaways, pool holidays, all inclusives, and she was like, no, I want to go hiking. So that's what they did. But obviously it's a thriller, so it didn't go quite to plan, and it was all a bit like, ooh, mysterious and whatever. So I wasn't like superly into this in the beginning, but it has really short chapters, so that just kept me pulled in. And oh, there's people there. I have never seen them before. Oh no, I've lost what I was saying. It has short chapters, so that kept me going and coming back for more. And I didn't really have a lot to do that day, and I was on my own, so I just kind of kept reading it. And I did enjoy it. I was pretty gripped by the end, but wait, hang on. That is incorrect. I have actually written not super gripping, but the short chapters kept me coming back. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, and then towards the end I've said like it was a page turner due to the storyline and the writing, so I obviously thought pretty highly of it. But yeah, the first point still stands. It still wasn't super gripping, if you ask me, but I was intrigued to find out what happened. I wanted to know what happened at the end. I would definitely give Lucy Clarke another go. Has she written other books? Oh yeah, she's written quite a lot of books. It did make me want to go hiking and camping, which is kind of silly because they had a horrible time. But the descriptions of the location, I was like, oh, that does sound like good fun. Like, if I didn't get murdered or anything, like, I actually think that would be really enjoyable. So, you know. And I had in my mind that this was going to be like a 3.75, 3.5, but I've just looked back on the Storygraph and I gave it 4 stars. So I was obviously pretty impressed with it by the end. But that's the first book I read, The Hike by Lucy Clarke. And then I finished that while I was at my parents' house, and I wasn't expecting to finish it because I was only there for a couple of days, but I read it a lot faster than anticipated. And I hadn't brought a spare with me, which never happens, but I hadn't. So I had to borrow one from my mum and dad, which worked out fine because it's one that I have had my eye on for ages and been wanting to read anyway, and that was The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas by John Boyne, which I would say most people, at least in my generation, have heard of. It's based, I think it's a children's book, but it's like, is it called middle grade? I did Google it and it says 11 plus. Basically, we're following Bruno, a 9-year-old German boy from a very privileged, wealthy background, and his dad is very high up in the Nazi group, and they get relocated to a house which, as an adult reader, you know is next to a concentration camp, but Bruno is just like the place beyond the fence, and he thinks it's really hilarious that all the people are wearing the same striped pyjamas with shaved heads. And basically, I don't know if that's a spoiler. Well, he befriends this boy in the striped pyjamas, Shmuel, who is a Jewish boy, and they become friends through the fence, but they don't really understand each other's lives. Shmuel understands a lot more of Bruno's, I think, than Bruno understands of Shmuel's. The writing in this is very childlike, but it's obviously about a child and it's written for younger readers, so that makes sense. And I do think it's good to have kind of depictions of massive historical events for younger readers so they can get an understanding into it. But yeah, you get a real sense of Bruno's inner monologue and thoughts through the writing, and there are quite a lot of repetitive phrases, things that come up again and again, and he says in the exact same way. But I think that's really good characterization. I'm not gonna lie, I found it a little bit annoying, but it perfectly depicts Bruno as a character, so it's really cleverly done. And yeah, I think that was intentional and just really added to Bruno's character. And I don't know, I think I'm gonna give this maybe a 3.5, maybe a 3.75. Like, it wasn't everything I hoped for and more, but it was still enjoyable. And it's a good job I ended up reading this, because I have All the Broken Places by John Boyne on my TBR that I picked up on a whim in a charity shop. Well, I thought I'd seen John Boyne recommended by a friend on Bookstagram, but I think I had the wrong author. So I feel like I had him mixed up with William Boyd, which might be really embarrassing. I'd never read any William Boyd, so they may be worlds apart. But yeah, I picked that up on a whim and then found out that it's the sequel to this book. So it's good that I read this, because now I can read that one and it's going to make a lot more sense. But I'm pretty sure that one follows his older sister, and it's like when she's an elderly woman looking back on her past, which is going to be a very interesting perspective following this one. And then next I read my June poll winner, which was Act Your Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the third instalment in the Eve Brown sisters trilogy, companion trilogy. I don't think you have to read them in order, but it makes sense if you do. Like, it makes the most sense if you do. I bought this back in, I want to say February, maybe a little bit later than that. I was really fancying some smutty romance, but I didn't get around to it at the time. And then, I'm not going to lie, when this came up in the poll, I was like, I feel like I'm over that now. And yeah, when it won, I was right. Like, I definitely was over it. I wasn't in the mood for it in the same way anymore. But it's fine. It was definitely not my favourite romance, but my favourite romance is The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang, and I don't think anything's ever going to top that, so there you go. But it just, like, I don't know. I felt uncomfortable in the sex scenes, and there were a lot. I didn't feel uncomfortable, but I was just a bit like, I don't need this in my life. Where sometimes I've read books like this and I'm like, woohoo! But this one I was just like, okay. But I felt like he was trying too hard to be funny, especially at the beginning. And this is a Grumpy Sunshine, which I don't normally love. In this context, I kind of got it, because the grumpy person, what's his name, Jacob, was autistic, and he struggled with social cues, so that was his grumpiness. But I still was kind of conflicted about it. Like, he didn't need to be that grumpy, if you ask me. And also, it's like marketed as enemies to lovers. It says it on the front. She's Sunshine, he's Serious. They're enemies, ... for now. Like, they definitely weren't enemies. It was more like a, oh my gosh, misread at first meeting to lovers. But obviously that doesn't have the same ring as enemies to lovers. So take from that what you will. That's kind of it. Like, it was a cute and fun romance, but it was definitely nothing special for me. I do enjoy the representation that Talia Hibbert puts into her books of marginalised groups. I think I'm going to give this 3.5, maybe 3.75. I think I gave Take a Hint, Danny Brown 4. I read that about a year ago. just over a year ago. And then Chloe Brown I read the year before, I think, but I didn't rate books then, so I have no idea where I'd put it. But I remember, I'm pretty sure that's the first smutty romance I read, and I was like, whoa, what the hell? I wasn't expecting it. And then my TBR jar prompt for June was a book that starts with F, and I had about 4 or 5 to choose from, and I went for this one, For When I'm Gone by Rebecca Lee, which I got in a box of stories a couple of years ago and have always been really interested in. The premise I thought sounded really, really good. It's come up on my monthly polls quite a few times and it never does very well, which always surprises me because, oh my god, it's noisy out there. Yeah, it's always surprised me because when I've read the synopsis, I always think it sounds really interesting and fascinating. So it's basically about this woman, Sylvia, who has a husband and 2 kids, and she's not very old. She's in the, I'm guessing 30s, maybe early 40s, but she's got 2 young kids and she's dying of breast cancer. So she writes this manual to her husband for when she's gone. It's just like, I don't know where to begin. So I read the first chapter. And I was just like astounded. So the first chapter is the start of Sylvia's manual. It's so noisy out there today. And I got to the end of that first chapter and was googling this author, has she written anything else? Because I need to know, because this is going to be amazing. I'm going to be crying. It's going to be so emotional. It's going to wreck me. And I was like, yes, this is something I'm really looking forward to. And then I read the second chapter, which set the scene properly, as it was just awful, basically. And I was just like, so basically we're following 3 timelines. There's the manual itself, so she's already died. And then there's when Sylvia and Paul, I think his name is, first meet. And then there's the present day. Is it when she's dying? No, because I think in the manual you kind of get to learn about the times when she was poorly. But then there's the present day after she's died. So it's from Paul's point of view. She is just not a likeable character, which feels really uncomfortable saying because she's dead. But she's just horrible. And like, she's writing stuff in this manual like to her husband who's grieving her. You have no idea how difficult it is to keep a house in order. You don't know what it takes and blah, 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 blah. And as much as you love our kids, you're never going to understand them the way I do, and you're never going to be able to be as good as I was. And like, it's just horrible. And I don't know. I was so like, I was kind of conflicted because like, it's kind of, it feels nice, like your wife's died and she's left you this big piece, this big like manual for like, when our daughter gets to her teenage years, these are things we need to look out for, and that's lovely. But then she goes and says stuff like, these are the things that I would have been looking out for that I know you'll never do without me telling you. And it's just like, ugh, be kind to him. He's just gone through the worst thing of his entire life. And then you're saying things like that to him. It just didn't feel nice. And then there was this big secret that we were waiting for to be revealed, which I felt like I could guess what it was going to be. And then it was that, but just so much worse and less interesting. It was so anticlimactic, and it was like, why have I been waiting for this? And then the last note I made about it was considering DNF. And then a couple of days later, that is exactly what I did. I don't know where I got to. I feel like I got maybe about halfway, just under halfway. But it wasn't like, normally when I DNF a book, I'm like reading it and something bothers me enough that I'm just like, no, that's it. Whereas this one, I realised I wasn't reading because I wanted to read. I got home from work and I felt like reading, but I was like, oh, I don't want to read that. So I just put it off and I wasn't reading anything. And then eventually I was just like, let me just read something else. So that's what I did. And then on the 29th, I finally finished the audiobook which I started on the 30th of April, which was Breath by James Nestor, narrated by himself, which is a non-fiction book about breathing and how good nose breathing is, basically, which is the main thing I got from it. So I have been trying to do a lot more nose breathing. Some of the things he said were really, really interesting. I definitely found it more interesting at the beginning, but yeah, I mean, it takes me a long time to read audiobooks because I used to read them in the car, but my journeys now are either 10 minutes, which is not long enough to put an audiobook on, in my opinion, or 2 hours, which is too long for me to listen to a book and not be able to stop it. And if I've got my nav on, I don't really concentrate on what they're saying anyway. So it does take me a long time to read them now. I mean, it did before, but even longer now. But I mean, yeah, I pretty much enjoyed it. I've taken a few things from it, but it's not going to change my life. And I'd probably give that like a 3.25. Pretty middle of the road, but the upper end of middle. And that's about it. So, with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Happy July. See you in the next one. I'm not gonna lie, I really feel like doing the TBR jar video for July, but I just know that's dumb. Bye!